Hey, we are wrapping up a great series called Dark Before Dawn, where in the month of November and December you got to know people who have fought through extraordinary hardship and trial and tragedy and loss and have battled through to the other side to victory. And we are finishing up today with a great episode, a great bookend of this series. Want you to welcome with me George Kalantzis, who served in the Marine Corps for 10 years. He lost his best friend over in Iraq, battled depression, battled addiction, and came back, retired after 10 years of service, and really dialed in and plugged into his own well-being and wellness, became a power lifter, a bodybuilder, really just grinded, worked his body, just became a machine virtually. And we'll get to later how he uses that to help other people, but struggled with a medical condition that kept him in and out of emergency rooms over a period of a few years. And we'll get into some of that. We get to hear about some of his battles with the ongoing depression, not only that, but thoughts of suicide, and really at one point took action in that direction, but thankfully stopped short of that. He became close with his father over the years and has been walking by his dad's side as he is currently fighting for his life with late stage cancer. George is a author of a book called Nowhere to Go, Navigating Tough Transitions. He has a podcast called The Art of Tough Transitions, and he is a personal trainer and coach, a single dad, walked through a season of divorce and really trying to be the dad for his daughter. And you can tell he just absolutely loves her and just pours everything he's got into his child. So I can't wait to get to know George. Haven't known him long, just barely met him a few weeks ago, but I can't wait to hear his story, hear his perspective, and his encouragement for you. So help me welcome George Kalantzis. So George Kalantzis, welcome to Last in Line podcast, man.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm stoked for it. Let's get into it. Holiday season,
man.
let's rock.
Let's go. It's a Good Friday. You've done your CPR training for the day, and we're all feeling better about having you in the room. So we feel a little safer with you here. Dude, so I in the intro, I kind of went through your bio a little bit, and quite an impressive resume. And not to go put the cart too before the horse, but your book talks about navigating tough transitions. So all the things that you've gone through, being in the Marine Corps, power lifter, bodybuilder, fighting depression from losing your best friend in Iraq, going through some thoughts of suicide, different journeys along the way, divorce. So talking about tough transitions, man, is there one part of the journey for you that was just like the absolute toughest yet most revealing to you?
Who really has one? And so what I like to do is I have like a trifecta of moments in my life, stories that I can like recall like this, which I'm about to share, that have really molded me into how I'm at, right? So the choice to it all, and before I even get to them, it's these decisions that really I made at moments that really allowed me to see what I was made of. And the first one was becoming a Marine. And that happened, before 9/11. Signed up before 9/11, high school kid, 17 years old, no path, no clue what was going on. Everyone's off to college. I'm a punk kid getting into drugs and stuff like that. I signed up for the Marine Corps. Cool. Oh, I wasn't going to graduate. Marine Corps was like, you can't become a Marine before 9/11 unless you graduate. I'm like, graduate? I want to serve the country. Like, no, it doesn't happen that way. You need to graduate. So I was like upset and dumbfounded. And then a 9/11 hit. And of course, I went to the Marine Corps recruiting office again. And I said, hey, I'm ready to join. They're like, you still need to graduate. And I was like, dude, like I'm ready. And so we worked out a plan. It was my first time where when I wanted something bad enough, I was going to put my mind and my efforts to it, and worked out a plan with senior year principals and I went to morning detention, evening detention, doubled up on classes while everybody's getting ready for college and partying. And I focused the whole senior year on graduating when I wasn't supposed to. And then I shipped off to boot camp. First big revelation, right? Give yourself permission to fail. Don't let others give you the option to perceive who you are not to be, and don't let other people's perception of you create the story that you can create.
Yeah.
Second biggest decision in my life was the choice to leave the Marine Corps after being just a little bit more than halfway retirement. I would have retired this year. Okay. 37, coming up on 38, would have had 20 years in the service. I chose to leave at 10 and a half. Right. All I knew of was unhappy. And I made some choices that either gave me the choice to stay in miserably or make the choice to leave. So I left with no plan, no clue of action. And this was a big one because this is one of those moments where, you know, we think we have the best plan in action. We make that choice, but really we have no plan and we rush into life. So while it was a great decision to leave the Marine Corps because I wouldn't be here, I left the Marine Corps clueless and rushed into life. At 27 years old, no clue who I was, what was going on in life, where I was headed. And so I created the story that I'm 27 and I need to do what men do. What do men do? They get a career, they get an MBA, they start a family. That's what men should do. And that's what I did. And it was awesome until it wasn't awesome.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I had that path of like, okay, I'm a man. If I check off all these proverbial boxes in life, all's going to be well. Right. And so I never did any work on myself. I just worked, I provided. That's what I saw growing up. And that led to, you know, a big gap between my relationship and my marriage, right? I had a woman who loved me, she did, but because I was never there, I provided, closed-hearted, very stoic. I created a gap between us and I never talked, we never communicated, never gave ourselves permission to get to know each other and get down. And when I did, I tell people I did what's called covert contracts, right? These are things that Mr. Nice Guy, as Robert Grover says, and No More Mr. Nice Guy creates, like, if I do something, then I expect something in return. So in my head, marriage is like, I'm married, I'm cool, she'll stay with me, we're good for the rest of our lives. That's what I had. I didn't say that, but that's what I expected. That's what I suspected. And so we obviously got a divorce. And then that was the biggest like downfall for me into what Robert Bly says, the catabasis. And it's basically a point in a man's life where there's a massive fall for status. So here I was, I climbed the peaks and valleys of life, got to the top, and then I fell from it really hard. And I had to go through the years of repressed emotions over and over and over to find out who I was. And so those three things together make up how I got here today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, those are good, I guess, points where you had to pivot, and some of them you're forced to, and some of them you kind of chose to, and sort of saw the handwriting on the wall and you had to make decisions. But man, during that time of coming out of the military, and then I wanted for you to maybe unpack some of that mindset you had of, okay, this is what's expected of me, because I think there's guys out there right now that fall right in that bucket, right? They fit right in that hole. They're the square peg that fits in that hole. And so they're thinking the same thing. So I got to get a family, you know, have a wife, have a kid, have a job, head down, you know, trudge along. Why is that? What did you miss during that time? And where do we miss it with that head down mentality?
Yeah, like anything, I think a lot of the stories that we think we need to create in life come from how we were brought up. And so there are basically essentially two types of messages we're taught growing up: implicit and explicit. Implicits are the ones that are like derived like directly in front of us, right? They're like family values, they're family experiences, they're all these experiences in our life that bring us to who we are. So implicitly, they're narratives around how we think life, quote unquote, should be.
Yeah.
Explicit messages are those other messages where we hear other people say things about life and we compare our lives to that, and we create a narrative around the other aspect of life, right? So those are two tug of wars that we have throughout our life, and we continue to have them no matter what, that give us narratives that make up a script of life. And so if we are off that script, we think we are wrong, inherently bad, yada, yada, yada. So at certain points in life, we create these narratives that give us an idea of what we need to be or who we should be, right? But here's the thing. If we're shoulding ourselves, what I have learned is that we're actually denying our authentic self by repressing our needs, by repressing our desires, and by repressing who we are, and giving ourselves a chance to challenge that narrative. Because that narrative, even though we might not want it, is a little bit more comfortable than going outside that narrative.
Yeah, that's perfect. No, that's two different. That's a dichotomy that we get into, sort of the external noise and then some of the internal perception or expectation, the Norman Rockwell painting that we somewhat picture, paint in our own minds growing up based on what we've seen and what we think's expected. Question about, so just kind of, we're just going to kind of go along this little timeline
Yeah,
of
man.
your life, man. And I want to ask a little bit about, so not to hit on it too deep, but anything you would have done different as a husband if you could. I mean, we all rewind the tape, we all look at the game
Yeah.
film and go in and clip things, and we would have done this or called this play. Man, anything. So about you now, who you are now, would you have been that husband that she needed or that you needed to be if you're the guy you are now back then?
You see, that's one of those things where it's like, cool, we could all wish we can go back, right?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
can't. The past happened, right? So anybody listening
Right.
to this, if they're stuck in that weird transition where their mind's marinating between, oh, I wish I went back, I wish I
Yeah.
went back, we can't.
Mm-hmm.
The
No.
past happened, right? But what you can do right now is, if you're in the middle of transition and you're still figuring things out, is that you can take care of yourself in this moment. Of course, if I could go back, the biggest thing I would tell myself is to communicate honestly about how you feel. If you're tired, tell people you're tired. If you need help, ask for help. Because I didn't have enough courage to ask for help because I was so afraid of an identity that no one cared about except myself. I was the
Mm-hmm.
Marine. I was a veteran. I could do this on myself. I don't need help. Right. And so, of course, those are the things that I would do. But I
Yep.
did the best with what I knew, which created the life with what I had. And the
Yep.
same thing could be said for anyone out there listening, right? If you're in the middle of the stuff, in the middle of the transition, right? It's hard to embrace. But the first way to move through and to overcome tough times is acceptance. Right. And that's how I got
Wow.
here today, by accepting my life as is.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I mean, that's another word I hear a lot is the ownership element. And during transition, whether it's good or bad, it's time we own that, right? That process, we own the journey, we own who we are through it. And it sounds like, I'm a late bloomer. Like I get places in life a little later than some people. And I start getting these revelations like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So owning the process 20 years ago would have come in handy for me, and not putting words in your mouth. But like, I know that the reason I asked that question about if you could go back is because if there's somebody listening that maybe would benefit from your learning that lesson and who you would have been or what you would have done different, maybe they can be like, okay, aha, I don't have to follow in the same footsteps. But so to transition, I mean, that's a great way to put it. And man, I mean, I didn't know you then, but I can tell now you've learned a lot from some of the mistakes, as we all do. I think that's the point of any failures or mistakes. Like if we don't make those over and over and we learn from them and move forward, that I think is where the growth is. And it sounds like that's what you're on track of doing. Um, Man, tell us a little bit about the lowest point. I'm saying it's the lowest point. I'm not going to put words in your mouth again, but you mentioned to me that you were battling depression and really getting those thoughts of suicide sort of started progressing down the road of actually thinking about going through with it. So would you consider that the lowest point? I mean, obviously a low point, but talk to us about that and how that happened.
Yeah, so it was a low point. So here's how it happened in my eyes, of course, only as what I can recall. So when I realized that my marriage was falling apart, I did everything to hold on, right? But in reality, when a relationship is, you know, crashing down like that, no amount of therapy can save it, right? The only thing that can save it is the couple engaged in themselves and wanting to communicate. So because we were communicating and therapy ish and whatever, it didn't work, it was too late. I held on to this idea that if I fight for my marriage right now, even though I never did in over the time frame, that it will all be good. She's telling me the truth, right? And so I basically let myself go even further.
Mm.
And what that means is, as a man, I went out of integrity. I didn't stand up for my values. I never told her how I actually truly felt. And I believed what she was saying because I loved her. Right. And love can be a beautiful thing, but because I let myself go in the process, our relationship dismattered. And so I had to move out of the house. I chose to move out of the house because I couldn't take what was going on anymore. In that moment, I turned to drugs and alcohol and sex. Most people couldn't tell because I have a very good disciplined by nature, and I wear a good mask, and I worked at a gym so I could party all night, wake up early in the morning when the gym opened, and shower and be good to go the next day. Just what I did.
Mm.
And so while I was doing that, it was slowly eating me away in the inside. My demons were with me every morning. I felt like crap. I had no energy. I was losing my clients, losing my business. I was went from a six-figure trainer to like a $40,000 trainer within 6 months. Not a, it's in, and so here I am. My self-worth was attached to my relationship status, my status as overall man, my net worth, all these things. And so when life went not so good, I didn't know who George was. And that drove me into the biggest depressive period I ever had. I was sleeping on my brother's couch. I had no money. The only time I ever felt like myself was when I was with my daughter every other weekend and a few days a week. And so one morning, after being completely exhausted, I woke up late for work. I didn't know what I had. I had been planning my death. I'd been trying to figure out how to do this. I couldn't go through with it. It wasn't time. I don't know. I was battling all these voices. I woke up late one morning, completely hungover, completely lost. I found myself in the middle of a parking lot and just about ready to take my life. And I say this all the time. I can't recall that day. I just can't. I wrote about it. As someone who's really good with words, I don't recall that day. It happened in a flash. All I know is that my body completely turned numb. I woke up with like snots and tears all over the place in the middle of my car. Gun was on the floor. My body was numb. I thought I was dead, but I wasn't. I was just frozen in time, complete shock. And there was a photo of my daughter, which is still in my car, looking up at me on my lap. And the unconditional love for my daughter saved my soul, saved my life. And something said that I wasn't done, that this is going to be the painfulest thing that you are experiencing in your life at the time, but it's time to make something of it. And then I did. I called I called every person on my phone until someone picked up. And one good friend picked up, and he talked with me until he saw me get rid of that gun and made sure I was safe. And the rest is history.
I mean, yeah, to be in that moment and just almost see yourself, but not see yourself like there, and just kind of, if you've probably just felt like you were in a bad dream. And man, when you describe that setting in the car, that's pretty riveting. Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm thankful that you got a hold of somebody and made those calls. And in that moment, man, it sounded like a wake up call that your daughter, like, you finally gained some perspective, because obviously before you went to that point, looking at your daughter's picture, I'm sure you thought this wouldn't be a good idea to leave her. But for whatever reason, sometimes those low points, we lose all reason and all rationale. Right. So from that point, like when you snapped out of that, almost like just snapped your fingers and kind of bounced out of that moment of wanting to take your own life, I would assume the transition wasn't overnight, like everything was just bright and rosy and rainbows, right? But what about your mind did you notice differently every day as you kind of went forward down that progressive route?
Yeah. So I think the difference is that I immediately got help, and I had help every step of the way, from AA to a life coach to a therapist, to just making sure that I had someone every day to talk to and truly tell how I was feeling. Because on one side, I was still a trainer, and I couldn't go tell all my clients how I was feeling, because they wouldn't want to train with me.
Yeah.
Right. And so I had to take a massive break there, which I did. And I started to kind of put together the pieces of what I needed in hiring a life coach. His name is Trevor Bohem, Man Uncivilized. It was the best thing I ever did. I had no money, literally had no money. It was in the middle of a divorce, and divorce sucks no matter how much money you have or how much money you don't have. And so I found my credit card and said, okay, I don't want to be like this anymore. I'm going to charge it for therapy, which I did. And I charged for a coach. And at those two pivotal moments, like having those two people in my life at that time, it gave me a way to look into my life, which I was afraid of, and connect the dots. And every day it got a little bit better, and it got a little bit better, right? First came the sobriety, biggest thing. Okay. No drugs, no alcohol, really hard. But again, had that trifecta of people in my life, AA, therapist, coach. And then after that, it was, okay, stop dating, stop trying to numb out with women. And then I found the writing. And so it was a slow process over and over. And in that process, I went to retreats. I went to men's work. I did some yoga. I did some breath work, right? I started to get out of my head and into my body. I started to recognize, where were my patterns? Like, why was I running? Okay, I used to run to XYZ. All right, where am I running now? And I put together the bits and pieces of my life. And that all started with those three and journaling. And then journaling gave me the power to feel. And the more I felt, the lighter I got, over and over and over. Now, for those listening, like, here I am almost 3 years away from this stuff happening. And yeah, I do have a book, but there's not a day where I don't have a demon with me. They're with me every day. The difference is that I learn to have a conversation with them or feed them what they need instead of trying to run from them. Just like Kobe Bryant says, like Black Mamba, right? His alter ego, right? So I have this dark dog, and he's with me every morning. I wake up, I feel heavy, I don't want to do this. All these things are there. It's true. Like, I'm clinically depressed. It is what it is. I get them some days, but the difference is I don't let them take the best of me. I acknowledge my feelings, and I find, even for the moment when I wake up, the little things that I'm grateful for. Feet on the ground. I woke up. Thank you. I'm going to go get some water. My daughter's sleeping. That's a beautiful sight to see. All of these things. And I look for the wins. I create them. And that's how I defeat it right now.
Yeah.
And so every day I wake up, I create wins.
Yeah. So so how did you get to that point? Was that somebody that helped you kind of identify that you needed to give it a name and give it maybe a persona in order to sort of acknowledge that demon is just kind of following you, or whatever you want to call that baggage that you carry around? Did somebody sort of point that tactic or strategy out to you? Because that's not necessarily intuitive to most people, that, hey, in order to cope with this, I'm just going to give it a name and carry it around with me all day. Like, talk about that. How did you get to that point?
I think it was a combination of just meeting different people at different retreats and doing the work and reading a bunch of works. I'm intuitive by nature. The Marine Corps trained me pretty well. And so I do credit having 10 years of Marine Corps experience to be able to pull back from some of the stuff that I've overcome. But the biggest thing I looked at is like, all right, where were my repeating patterns? When did they come into my life? And what did I want to run? So I learned to switch the mindset. So first thing in the morning I used to do before all this all happened was wake up, I'd have some dreams. I'd act like they weren't there. I'd down a lot of coffee, energy drink, hit the gym, and then train all day. Now, every morning is a complete switch. Rather than train first thing in the morning, which is amazing if you do, I'm not knocking it. I get up and I do the hard stuff first. And for me, the hard stuff is acknowledging my feelings. All right. So I do that. I sit down, I write, I feel it all. I get it out of my head. I do a little bit of work, and then I go train.
Yeah.
So that's how I found my demons.
Well, that's crazy, man. It's awesome. I love writing too. And it's cathartic for, I would guess, anybody that writes would say that. But it does kind of tap into that side of you that looks like your past didn't really tap into, because you were suppressing a lot of the thoughts and feelings and didn't know how to express or communicate. Did you grow up in a house where communication was vital? Like, you're a Greek family, right? I come from the Middle Eastern family descent as well, but like, did you guys suppress, or was it fiery communication like my house where nobody bit their tongue, unfortunately, sometimes? But like, talk about some of that and what you saw and modeled for you.
My childhood was it was fiery, but I can't say there was communication. I'll tell you that. So my dad was rest is, he's really sick with cancer right now, and he did the best with what he knew, right? Because that's what he learned, but he was always gone.
Okay.
And so us kids like fended on our own as a young age, right? So we never really had a chance to be a kid, right? And then of course when he was around, emotionally abusive, sometimes physically abusive.
Okay.
And so my life as a kid was chaos. And so that taught me that I didn't have needs, that my voice didn't matter, and that I was never loved. Exactly. And so joining the Marine Corps was a chance to prove that I was worthy, which is cool, but I still had that inner voice that I was never enough, which led into my marriage, right?
Yeah.
And occasionally trickles into parenting, which, it is what it is. We do our best.
Oh, dude, I know the feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. but that's where it came from. And so I'm doing my best now to make sure that when I get triggered, because kids trigger the crap out of us, just like any intimate relationship, that I'm trying to find a place of like, all right, it's normal to do that. We're human, but where does that coming from? And can I make sure that doesn't happen again?
Yeah, that's what I wanted. That's why I wanted to dig into that a little bit briefly, because what you saw and what you had to live, sort of survival mode, didn't allow for you to get vulnerable, didn't allow for you to process feelings, emotions, didn't allow you for really an environment for affirmation or positive reinforcement. So you had to go get that as you grew up. You had to go find that in the Marine Corps and different things. And so that's really what I was thinking you were going to allude to. But I mean, watching certain things as we grow up, or even not having the modeling, makes us sort of derive within ourselves just our own spin on life, right? And our own processing of things, which isn't always correct. And so we go down roads that we don't need to go down because we're just doing the best we can, because we never really got taught or fed any of that. So how are you doing it different? And I want to talk about your book a little bit and your dad some more, but how are you doing it different now? What's good look like for you as a parent, with your daughter? Like, talk about that.
I don't really know what good or bad is, whatever it is, but like all I know is that I try every day to be engaged with her as much as possible and to be authentically interested in her life as a 5-year-old. And of course, parenting today in today's world is no easier than it was 50 years ago or whatever it is. Parenting, no matter what, is extremely hard. But I try to just ask her how she's feeling, why she's angry, why doesn't she want to get ready for school? Why doesn't she want to wear this? And I try to see what's going on. And then of course, she's learning boundaries, I'm learning boundaries. So it's like it's like a dance back and forth without me trying to create this massive enmeshment where she has to rely on me and I have to rely on her, right? Trying to teach her independence, but also that sometimes you're not going to get everything. She's not going to get everything she wants and needs exactly like that.
Yeah.
And so it's a balance, but I
Yeah.
also remind myself that she's not going to be this young forever.
No, trust me.
And so I can't get mad about her interrupting me on work or having toys everywhere or wanting to spend time when I'm exhausted, because this time, like soon enough, she'll be into grade school, playing with friends, sleeping over, and then dad is just on the other side.
Dad's writing checks at that point. Dad's just the
Yeah.
check writer. Hey, so is it fair to assume that you've given her the permission and you've opened those lines of communication to let her know, like, this is okay to share when you're sad, when you're angry, when dad maybe disappoints you or somebody hurts you? Like, is she feeling like, I don't know how old she is, obviously not like mature enough to really get some of that, but are you laying the groundwork now so that she can't repeat some of those things of, oh, I can't share, I can't feel, I can't, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I believe I am. I mean, I tell her when I'm sad and when I'm angry, and if I get angry, I apologize at her and let her know that it's not her fault. So I think she hears those things from me, and she's only about to be 6, so she might not completely understand, but I think when she sees me acknowledge the feelings and stuff like that, so I'm doing my best,
good.
right? It's raising a kid with 2 households is very difficult.
I can't imagine.
Like,
I mean, it's hard enough in one, man.
Yeah, 2 different parenting styles, and you really don't talk about it much. We agree on a lot of things, but obviously what happens over there happens and what happens over here happens, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is.
That's right. I mean, it sounds like I think they get more than we think they get. Honestly, I think they're pretty perceptive. So sounds like you're laying that legacy, that foundation that maybe you didn't have. So you're kind of making this look different and changing your, generations to come. It sounds like to me in a good way. But man, talk about, let's unpack this book just a little. I haven't read it yet. It's on my list. I've got some books that I'm reading next year, and this one's it's way up there on the list. But what are you most proud of about what came out? When, I know you have a vision. I wrote a book last year, but I know you have a vision of how you want it to look, how you want it to sound, the perspective, all the tone, the things you want to share. Did it turn out exactly like you planned? And what are you most proud of about it?
Oh yeah, it's everything I could have asked for in a book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, though, as you grow as a writer, anybody's listening to this, so this took me from initiation to now, almost 3 years, 4 drafts, lots of hard work, lots of mornings, all this stuff. So a lot of time for my first book. And I look back and think of stuff. I'm like, wow, like, I don't know if I like in believing that, not believing it, but like if I would say that right now. So it's very interesting. But I'm very proud of this book because I took a dark time in my life and I said, this is not who you are. You get to choose who you want to become.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very proud of that because how many people in life say they're going to write a book and never write it? How many people say they want to publish a book and never publish it? How many people say things that they want to do but never actually follow through? And so this is my proof to myself. It's my gift to myself to say, like, you can do anything, man. It's not going to be easy, but you can do anything.
Yeah. And man, I feel like I've said those exact words to myself, because it's been, if I'm being nice, it's been 5 years that I've been wanting to write a book. But I think if I'm being honest, it's been like 10. And I finally got off. COVID sort of forced me to get off my butt and quit being lazy or fearful or whatever, or insecure, and just doing it. And I hear what you're saying, because I mean, you're preaching to the choir on that one. So what part of that book are you getting most feedback on, or are you hearing like people that are in similar journeys along the way, like their darkness is kind of mirrors your darkness a little bit? And then what are you hearing about it?
The biggest thing I hear about is basically, thank you for giving me space to go deeper into my own life. Right. By you sharing your stories from, it's a lot of women saying like, hey, as a man, like, you were giving me like hope for my life, but also hope that there's other men that are willing to do the work like that, which is very interesting.
That is a decent perspective. I didn't see that coming. Did you see that coming though? Like when you wrote it, you didn't think about that. No way.
No, I didn't see that coming at all. Yeah. So
yeah,
it's an interest. You never know with a book. And that's the thing, right? I personally wrote the book for myself originally, right? Just like we all do. We write to pull ourselves out of healing. It's very cathartic. And then while I started writing, people started to reach out to me, said like they love my story, they love my message. So I basically took all the things that I wrote about in the last few years and made them better and put it into a book for others to see that you can make it through tough times and that you don't have to let what happens to you become who you want to become.
Yeah.
Right. And you can rewrite your own story, but the only way to break free from the past and to rewrite your story is to accept it first, no matter how hard it may seem.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Back to that ownership thing again, and really just be okay with some of the failures, because that's not really defining who you can be down the road. And I'm sure you've got there mentally many times. Talk about, man, your dad. We're going to talk about a little bit too, because I'm sure you talk about him in the book a little bit, and maybe some of your upbringing, and now you sound like you have a little bit different perspective as he's going through his struggle, and you're starting to, I'm sure you guys are having some conversations that maybe you didn't have when you were younger or in the past. What has changed about your relationship with your dad as he's, late stage cancer? He's, so what's changed about it? And talk about how, because this series is Dark Before Dawn, and I'm assuming like now it's a better relationship between you two, just from a communication standpoint. So what are some of those conversations look like?
Honestly, he's still a stubborn old man. Right. But in that stubbornness, like even myself and my brothers and sisters, we have seen where like the way that he speaks and the way that he shows up is like his way of like saying like, I'm sorry without saying it. And we've seen him cry, and how much pain he's going through, but he still like shows up to things. Mm-hmm. And so that allows us to just have a little bit different perspective. We're all older. We all know what happened now that we've looked back and we can see it. Right. So I think my relationship is just an acceptance of his own, also foreshadowing his death in that reference. Right. So because people like my dad or anybody going through a terminal illness, like understand, even though if they can't say it, understand that death is imminent, like it's here. And so you see them change in different ways. And I think that they're, even though, like I said, they may not be able to admit it or say it, that they're some of the strongest people out there in the world. To live, to wake up every day, even though like darkness has said you don't have any time, shows how strong you are.
Yeah. And I mean, talk about gratitude. I'm assuming that population of people, when they do open their eyes and their feet hit the ground, like they're like, okay, got another day. Right. And so I'm
Yeah.
assuming there's some gratitude that's attached to that for sure. Um, man. So what else about the book? Like, do you see, because it kind of evolved, I guess, into this podcast, right, that you're doing, and or are they totally separate, or did one, I mean, obviously the book came and then the podcast, or so what led you down that road to really talk about it? Because you're a guy of the written word, right? You're definitely a writer, but what transitioned you into this podcast platform?
Yeah. So basically, the art of tough transitions
Yeah.
is still in a creation of a brand, but I believe that I've been put here on this earth to empower others to live authentically by first sharing my story authentically. And because my words give others a safe space to really find out who they are, right? And so I believe I was put on this earth to empower others to overcome the toughest days of their life by sharing my story. And I can only do that if I'm authentic. And one way to be authentic is to write about my life and to share it. And so the book, and it started with articles and then the podcast. Now the podcast has guests and it turns into like weekly podcasts with myself, but also a bi-monthly guest, right? And so
Mhm.
all of these things come together to really represent the flame, which is the art of tough transition right here. And the flame represents hope, it represents passion, but it represents destruction and rebirth and the creation of all these things into life. And so it's really like an alchemy of things that come into
Yeah.
play.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I were you surprised at the podcast and how much you enjoy it? I mean, I assume you do. So were you, cause I've never done anything like this, and I don't know what your background is in this regard, but were you kind of pleasantly surprised as to where it went and how it developed and kind of blossomed? And now you got guests, and now you're sharing a lot of different other people's stories. Like you're kind of planting seeds with other people. And so what do you like most about it so far?
Yeah, I think it's an amazing opportunity for us to just share our stories on deeper levels because like as Joseph Campbell said, like our stories are gold.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And every choice that we make is thread in together with the fabric of life. And we're all on this magnificent journey over and over and over. So it's this beautiful dance. And so when we can podcast, when we can write, when we can connect on a deeper level and share our stories authentically, then we're living.
Yeah.
Because there's so many people out there that are just existing, right? Or just existing on the surface, not even like worried about who they are and willing to express their stories. So I believe like stuff like this podcast, my book, your
Yeah.
podcast, other podcasts, all these things really just to give us the power to live, man.
Yeah, it's a breath of fresh air. I mean, I love doing it. I love hearing stories. I love meeting new people. I mean, this is not about me, as you'll probably admit too, that yours is, not about you. It's about helping other people and sharing stories. And I think you're doing a great job. And I think I mean, this is the tip of the iceberg, I think, for you and the book and the writing. And like, I can see a lot more coming out of you at some point soon. You might already be in a process of another book. I don't know, but before I let you go, man, tell us where we can find you and some of the resources that you've got out there available. Because I've listened to the podcast, and then I've found some of your blog and your poems and different things, and I think it's awesome. But tell us where we can get some of that.
Yeah. So if you want to know more about the book, essentially, for anybody listening, the book is not a 5-step process or 10-step plan to get through life, right? Nope, because we're all too unique.
Yeah,
Basically, nowhere to go is stories from my life. It is a combination of prose and poetry that allows you to go deeper into your own life with a little bit of journal prompts hitting in there. Yes, you got to read it to find it, and a little bit of flow to help you really say like, okay, when this happens, like I know that XYZ is happening in my life. How can I go deeper? So nowhere to go. You can get that and everywhere books are sold. Or if you want to get it from me, you can go to theartoftouchtransitions.com and get it for 99 cents digitally. And then you'll be entered in this awesome email series to help you kind of go deeper into your own life. You can find me on Instagram, and then you can find me on as well as Medium and Substack. And those are the biggest places that I hang out.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, man. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, audience, hey, it's been a pleasure having George on, and for him to be so transparent. Like, that's not surprising to me because I've read some of his stuff, and he doesn't hold back. His book, I imagine, I can't wait to get into it, is no different. So I'm going to encourage you guys to go out and get a copy of it, and really start to challenge yourself to really dig in within you and just kind of unlock some of those doors maybe you've put away in the dark, somewhere in the past, and just kind of left them, man. Try to explore some of that. George is living proof that there's healing to it. It's healthy. It's empowering to go down, move the ball down the court. So George, on behalf of the audience, man, I really appreciate it. And it's been an honor having you. Audience, he's been George Kalantzis. We've been Last in Line. Be blessed.